Hi everyone, this is Gloria again. I'll be reading a story from Chicken Soup for the Soul. This story is called Lost and Found. Winona was 19 when she first met Edward, a tall, handsome young man in the summer of 1928. He had come to Detroit to visit his sister, who was engaged to Winona's brother. Edward stayed with some friends, and although he was there for a couple of days, there was enough time to get to know the lively, dark-haired young woman who intrigued him from their first meeting. They promised to write, and Edward returned to Pittsburgh. For many months, they wrote long, newsly letters sharing details of their lives and their dreams. Then, as quickly as he came into her life, Edward left. His letters stopped, and Winona gradually accepted the simple fact that he was not interested anymore. Edward couldn't understand why Winona had stopped writing, and he too resigned himself to the fact that the woman he had fallen in love with did not return his love. Several years later, Winona married Robert, a dashing man 10 years her senior. They had 3 sons. She got news of Ed's life through her sister-in-law. Several years after Winona married, Edward got married, and he too had 3 children. On one of her visits to her brother and sister-in-law in Buffalo, her brother announced, We're driving to Pittsburgh to Ed's daughter's wedding. Do you want to come? Winona didn't hesitate, and off they went. She was nervous. In the car, just thinking about what she would say to this man she hadn't seen in 30 years. Would he remember their letters? Would he have time to talk with her? Would he even want to? Soon after they got to the wedding reception, Ed spotted Winona from the other side of the room. He walked slowly over to her. Winona's heart was racing as they shook hands and said hello. When they sat at one of the long table to talk, Winona's heart was beating so hard she was afraid that Ed would hear it. Edward had tears in his eyes as they exchanged polite conversation about the wedding and their respective families. They never mentioned the letters, and after a few minutes, Ed returned to his duties as father of the bride. Winona returned to Detroit, where she continued teaching piano lessons, working as an advertising agent, and always making the best of whatever life offered. She tucked away the memories of her brief visit with Ed, along with her other memories of him. When Ed's wife died 10 years later, Winona sent him a sympathy card. 2 years after that, Winona's husband died, and Ed wrote to her. Once again, they were corresponding. Ed wrote often, and his letters became the highlight of Winona's day. On her way to work, she stopped by the post office to pick up the letter, and then she read them at the stoplight. By the end of her half-hour drive, the letters were read, and Winona had a happy start to her day. Gradually, Edward expressed his love for his darling Winona, and they arranged for him to come to Detroit for his vacation. Winona was excited and nervous about his visit. After all, except for their brief meeting at the wedding, they hadn't spent any time together in over 40 years. They had only been writing for 6 months, and Edward was coming for 2 weeks. It was a lovely, warm June day when Winona drove to the airport to pick up Edward. This time, when he saw Winona, he rushed to her and wrapped his arm lovingly around her. They chatted happily and comfortably as they retrieved luggage and found their way to the car. It was an easy beginning. When they were at the car, When they were in the car on their way to Edward Hotel, he pulled a small velvet box out of his pocket and slipped an engagement ring on Winona's finger. She was speechless. He had hinted at marriage in his letters, but this was too sudden and too soon. Or was it? Hadn't she waited all these years to know his love? For 2 weeks, Ed wooed his Winona. He even wrote her letters from his hotel. Winona's concern gradually dissolved in the stream of Ed's love and the wholehearted support of her family and friends. On September 18, 1971, dressed in a long pink gown, Winona was escorted down the aisle on the arm of her oldest son. She and Edward were married, and in Winona's words, we lived happily ever after. And those letters that had suddenly stopped so many years before, it turns out that Edward's mother had destroyed Winona's letter because she didn't want to lose her youngest son. 43 years later, Winona found him. And this is from Eleanor Daly Hall. I think this is an awesome story.